Welcome to Movie Bounce with Mike and Harry, where we'll bounce from movie to movie.
From actor, writer, director, any which way.
Who knows where we'll bounce to next?
Hi, I'm Harry,
Hey, it's Mike.
and we're back for another episode where today we are going to spend most of the time talking about Parasite. And we talked a little bit about how to follow up the Joker, right? It was kind of like, do we want to just leave it and go in a completely different direction, or did we want to come up with a movie that had some linkages? And I think we decided we were going to do Parasite because there were some links to the Joker.
Yeah, I think we brought Parasite up even in the Joker review, and it just seemed like, just through our conversation, how it kind of organically flowed. It would make sense to speak about Parasite, since again they actually came out the same month, and they were both up for Best Picture in the Academy Awards. Just Parasite happened to have won the main awards of the evening. So yeah, it makes the most sense, and especially a film that it really stood out in 2019 as being the best film of the year for me. But like I've told you before, there were at least 7 other films that I've said last year were the best film of the year. Because 2019 was just a great year for movies, whereas, in 2018, 2017, it took, I don't even know, I think I might have said this to you, like, I didn't think that there was a best film of those years. So, yeah, blew me away. One of the many films that blew me away at the end of 2019, and I'm excited to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we do that, so after Joker, I had Batman on the brain for a few days. So I thought a little bit, and look, we're definitely going to dive into a lot of the Batman movies individually. But one thing that I wanted to get your take on, I want to hear your opinion, is Gotham City. Like, just what do you think about how it's depicted across? Let's say the majority of the Batman movies. I'm not going to include Batman versus Superman, but just kind of going through some of these movies in turn and how you think how it resonates with you. And because I see Gotham City as another character in a lot of these movies, and I have my own opinions, but I want to hear yours, especially without you not having the same comic background as I do.
Sure, yeah, but I'm curious why you exclude Batman versus Superman.
Because that movie. Let me start over. Because Gotham City is not particularly relevant in that movie, and I don't think it has any particular weight to it or anything that would make me remember the city or the setting as a
I
whole.
mean, just to go back to your question, of course, you have the comic background, but for me, as being the first Batman movie to have watched was the Batman '89. And it definitely resonated. I mean, I was a kid, but like it definitely resonated to me because I think the first half of that movie, I just remember there was a lot of focus on like the emptiness of Wayne's mansion and all that, Wayne Manor, and the camera did linger on that and the emptiness of the Wayne's place. I just remember the sets. Of course, it's more practically done. But the last time I watched it, I just remember how much had been done in the German expression. Well, you'll go into more detail about this, but the second Batman film was Batman Returns. I don't think it resonated as much in the sequel, actually, now that I think about it. But in the first movie, it definitely was something. I mean, it ended on one of the final shots of the movie was the camera rising up one of the buildings and overseeing, I believe, all of Gotham. But I think it definitely played a bit more of a character in '89, more than in Returns. And I think in Forever, Batman Forever, and came out in June of '95, it resonated less because I think that like you brought up Batman versus Superman and not really having much into play. I think that for Forever, it seemed like It seemed like it just came out of a cartoon. I mean, at one point, the Batmobile is driving up a building, and it just seemed like we're not in reality at all. Same thing with Batman and Robin. And then you have the Nolan movies. It's interesting because I know that they were filmed in Chicago. The Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, but then The Dark Knight Rises was filmed a little bit in Chicago, Philly, and New York. But in Batman Begins, it seemed like you didn't want to have anything specifically identify Chicago. I might be wrong about that, but it was hard not to in The Dark Knight Rises because there literally is a chase scene going through, so that where everything's pretty much identifiable with Chicago. But in New York, they literally have these. I think it's the green line or the red line. They're popping up there, the subway the entrances and such like that there. So it's just like, oh my gosh, that's clearly Manhattan, and they're not even disguising it because I think it said Wall Street, But yeah, I feel like in the Nolan films, it just seemed a little bit more like this was more the real world, where compared to Tim Burton's Gotham, it seemed more like it wasn't. It was just a different world. Especially Batman Begins, there's heavy emphasis on they've repeated this line over and over, which is like the city is worse than ever, and that the characters are reflecting that. You're supposed to see that, of course, within. I think it was. Falcone, whatever, and what he had done to the city, and I guess you're supposed to see like, oh, this is horrible. You don't want to live there. This is someplace
but
you
it's
need
a
to
show
save.
don't tell, and I have no remembrance. I'm gonna actually just slide this in here because it does count. They do a better job in the Joker about kind of giving you this feeling, this icky feeling about the city.
Right.
Certainly more than they did in Batman Begins.
Right. Yeah, and Joker. Yeah, I forgot to mention the Joker. Yeah, I think that. But see, I just maybe because again, kind of very similar to the Dark Knight Rises. I just did the subway chase that was in Brooklyn, so I was like, oh, this isn't Gotham. This is Brooklyn, and some areas in the Bronx. So it maybe it's just me being a New Yorker where it didn't seem. I think only a few scenes, like when you see the the Asylum, where it seemed a little bit more kind of having some semblance to. I can't even say the Burton's Gotham or even Nolan's Gotham, but no, I'll have you take it from here. But before Harry takes it from here, a quick message from a fan of James Cameron. Are you yourself a fan of Jim Cameron? He's made some great films, from Terminator to Aliens, Terminator 2, The Abyss, True Lies, Titanic, Avatar. All hits, all huge hits. They looked amazing in theaters, even better sometimes on home video. Except for True Lies. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. True Lies. A modest hit when it came out in July of 1994, and the fans have been there for quite some time. But it doesn't look that good. It's only made it to DVD. I mean, you try to upscale that in a 4K Blu-ray player, and it'll still look horrible. So the fans haven't gotten the solid quality version of that film that they deserve. And there's probably an HD 1080p version of the film streaming somewhere, but it still didn't look that good. And the best quality version of a film is when it's all there. You got the source right there, not streaming from the internet. You got it on a disc that looks well-defined, incredible in your household. And Jim Cameron's not giving that to you now. Not that he doesn't want to, he just hadn't gotten it done. So what I'm here to do today is spread awareness. And what can you do? Shout this from rooftops. Let Jim Cameron know that you want a 4K Blu-ray quality True Lies disc. Okay, maybe not shout it from rooftops. That's extreme, but you can add him on Twitter or, just hashtag True Lies 4K Blu-ray. Maybe that'll get his attention. Just let him know if you see him next to you on the highway or something like that, or at a red light. Shout it at him. Let him know. Get him to get on it. Because he's too focused on Avatar 2, and we want to see what that looks like, but, that can wait. We need True Lies is a good movie. Anyway, and 4K Blu-rays are definitely dying, but, they'll be back in 10 to 15 years, so don't just focus on streaming, guys. It's like vinyl. It'll be back, and we want the best quality version in our hands. So, do that. Back to you, Harry.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've said my piece on the Nolan films. It didn't really leave me with any impression about Gotham. The Burton Batman's completely different story. You brought up the German expressionism. What I really want to say is, in those movies, I felt that there could be a Batman and there could be a Joker and a Penguin in this city. Like, I felt like this city could give birth to those characters because it is kind of weird, and it's just of such a style that I could see that within that story, it influences people to become that way. Like, it's very theatrical, it's very dramatic, it's very well, and especially when you think about like some of the architecture in Batman Returns, it just seems almost even impractical,
Right.
and so huge too. Like, they're almost. They're somewhat operatic in that, like they're like these sprawling kind of like outdoor theaters. So I think that's really cool, and I think it's very fitting. It's like they all kind of complement and play off each other. All of these elements, whether it's setting, character, score, it does a really good job of kind of clicking where they work in tandem.
You know,
So, yeah, please.
oh, I was gonna say that's a really good point because, like you're saying, you can imagine these characters being birthed in the city. Like, after the '89 Batman, Burton did a lot of the heavy lifting with that city, and that as soon as the opening of Returns, when you see it focuses on Oswald Cobblepot, and the parents abandon him, they throw him in the sewers, and then you totally get like to your point, like, oh, we as an audience are so used to Gotham City, and we totally believe that all these parents are that dark to do that, and that this can happen, that this is going to be the path, this character can go down this path, as unrealistic as it is. Within the city, this can be birthed. A villain like this can be birthed, and of course with Catwoman there too. Yeah, totally. To your point, I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah, and that's stuff that always sticks with me. Like I think whenever you think about either of those movies, your brain immediately like pulls the setting in. When I think about Dark Knight Rises, it's very, very little to do with the setting and basically all of the Nolan films. And then, I liked what you said about Batman Forever and Batman and Robin being very cartoony. I think it's almost like that's a Gotham that like was almost like transformed after Batman, where it's like now you have Batman and you have these weird villains, and the city is almost a reflection of that. So it's almost the opposite of the Burton Gotham City, where it's like, okay, well, yeah, now we have like this weirdo Batman with all these gadgets and like these toys, and he's fighting like all these weirdos, and the city kind of turns more into that because like people then are accepting that into their lives. So that's kind of my viewpoint on that. I'm not going to comment on either of those movies as a whole, but there's something interesting about the setting to me that Schumacher kind of brought to the movie.
But I mean, it's interesting you had that take because I'd say I had a totally different take because, like I said, I think because of that cartoonish kind of, and that element there to the city, it just totally, as opposed to like I mentioned with Batman Returns, where I'm like, oh, I can totally see this character being birthed in the city. In Batman Forever, I'm like, what the hell happened to this city? Like, and yeah, like you're saying, they've enough times gone by where the people of the city have accepted Batman, accepted that you've got these villains popping up. I guess they've lived with Two-Face for how long, I don't know, but
Right.
that it's just so welcomed. And the characters within the city are so beyond cartoonish. You have these reporters saying, "Oh, Mr. Wayne," they're so over the top. It's so grandiose. It just detached me from what had been set up previously with Burton. It's just like you removed all that heavy lifting that he had done. I can't give it that credit that you give it to say, because you're projecting that onto the film, I think, and that's not the film's not doing that. You're giving
Yeah,
more credit
that's
to the
fair.
film than it's deserved because I just feel like, and I totally get it afterwards. The studio's like, Batman Returns was way too dark. Bring it in, bring it back. This is all about merchandise with what happened behind that movie. So it's just like that's kind of what I see after the fact. But just going with me watching it for the first time, I'm like, it looks like that Gotham City that Burton created, but no, something's off. And as time went on with the movie, it took away from the weight of the film. I'm like, well, there's not all a moment where I think any of these characters are in any real jeopardy. And in Returns, I did feel that way. I felt like, like the stuff that Penguin did by to Michelle Pfeiffer's character, you go, oh, she can die. This character, this world has set this up where that's a realistic possibility in this movie. But in Forever and Robin, I'm like, no, nothing's going to happen. All these characters are going to be fine. They'll be put in jail. So I think it all is to the detriment in the way they've crafted everything.
Yeah. No, sure, sure. I think just focusing in on the setting though, I it kind of gives me this vibe where it's kind of like, again, to say the setting was transformed perhaps more than the characters. But yeah, of course, the whole vibe with that is way more comic booky and way more cartoony. So obviously that's what they were going for.
Right.
But I still think it has character, whereas in the Nolan movies, there's literally zero character. You
Oh,
mentioned all the different cities that they filmed in. The opening sequence in Dark Knight was in Chicago when the school buses are going along. I want to say like the river, like
right.
that's very Chicago. So yeah, like they were just pulling in places. They didn't have a necessarily, from my perspective as a viewer, there was not a clear vision on how they wanted Gotham to look.
But do you think that was the intention of Nolan? And again, I don't know if this was his intention or whatever it would be. I haven't looked into it much. But then as we're discussing it, I'm thinking, like you meant, I'm like, I forgot at the beginning of Dark Knight, as you mentioned, like, oh, you knew exactly probably where that was filmed. You've been to Chicago. We've been to Chicago. I mean, but the thing is, it's just like when you've been to Chicago, you know these specific locations. Do you think that, I mean, Nolan could have picked a different city in, in Canada. But he chose Chicago because he knows a lot of the viewers have probably been there, and they're gonna. It's basing it in reality. That was that intent to be like, this is no. There are heavy stakes. This is the real world. Let's imagine that Batman's in the real world, and Gotham City is a part of the United States, and and all that. So I think that was just Nolan's different take, and I go, it worked for me as an audience member. Again, I don't have that grounded roots within the comic. But for grounding it, totally worked within Nolan's vision.
Well, Chicago also does have very good architecture, so maybe
Right.
that could be part of it. I do want to say, as kind of like trivia for you and the non-comic book fans out there, so Metropolis is based off of Chicago, and Gotham is based off of New York.
Right.
And Chicago is and Metropolis is supposed to be a lot more optimistic looking. It's supposed to be brighter, whereas Gotham/New York is supposed to be grittier, grimier, darker, and that reflects the two characters. His adventures take place often in the day, and Batman just punches in at like probably 9 p.m. or something. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, again, I'm only going off the movies because I haven't read the Superman comics either. But didn't the '78 Superman, wasn't that taking place Metropolis taking place in New York? Wasn't that filmed in New York?
It's totally possible, and I think you're right. But I'm just saying,
again,
it's like,
from the comics.
and yeah, this is where things break down, and people more knowledgeable than I can set me in the right direction. I think that idea of Metropolis being Chicago kind of fell by the wayside when they were making the movies because they just wanted like that New York vibe. Like that's where movies were taking place for the most part, right? In that era, like New York, or like
Right.
they wanted all of that, like they
That
wanted,
energy.
exactly, the cabs, like that whole feeling behind it.
Right. And actually, now that I think about Superman, I'm going, yeah, from what I recall from the '78 Superman, yeah, that, Metropolis, the way they filmed that definitely added a lot to the story. And I know I bring up the characters again a lot in these movies, but they play off of each other. It's just, it's that vision. It's your, it is that vision. It's you as a viewer watching, buying into the reality of the film. And again, that's why, just briefly mentioning again, Schumacher's Batman, I didn't buy into the reality of the film, and it took me out of it. And that's, I think, a failure on Schumacher's part. That's just me. Others can like that. But I go, well, this is what disconnects me from whatever intent he had. And I guess it was just to entertain, but that's a very bare minimum. But like even in Richard Donner, Superman, I'm like, yeah, you're right. In Metropolis, it added a lot. Again, it grounded me in the, like you said, the energy of the characters. They're very upbeat, very optimistic. And that energy of the movie, it all worked together. Yeah, now that I think about it, I kind of want to rewatch those Superman movies now.
Well, I won't get in your
Only
way.
two.
I don't know if I could watch them. Maybe the first
Only the first
two.
two, right? Not the
Maybe
one
the
where
first two.
Superman's drunk with Richard Pryor. As much as I love Richard Pryor, it's a quite Superman. I mean, Clark and Superman. He really takes a detour, just a real nosedive.
I will
Leaning
say, I
Tower,
remember.
Pisa scene. Oh God.
Well, there's not a lot you can do with Superman just generally, and to have to
Right.
write a third movie. I don't envy, whoever had to write that script. I will
Sure.
say, Superman 3, that scene where the lady like turns into a robot or something, scared the
God.
shit out of me as a kid.
That
I
did.
just-
You're right.
Oh God, it was awful.
She was pretty mean. Right, yeah. I haven't seen the fourth one, so I don't know if things got worse, darker, or lighter. But anyway, those are movies. I guess those last two are ones we should all forget.
Well, maybe one day we'll just sit down, watch them, and then do a quick episode on them. There might be something to talk about or to latch onto, but
Right.
there's just way too many better movies to talk about. So I will use that to jump into Parasite.
Okay.
So now, how's that?
Wait, hold on. One thing. You didn't want to talk about Joker's? Joker? Joker resonated with you for days. But all he kept thinking about were the other Batmans and the way the Gotham City had the most impact. So if you were to say that the Gotham City that had the most impact that on theatrically, it would be Burton number one. Is
Oh,
where they were ranked.
absolutely. Yeah,
Burton, and
no,
then
no
the next one would be
contest.
Todd Phillips's, or
Well, I
it
would
sounds like.
say, it would be 89 Batman, then Batman Returns, because
All right.
those they have enough difference that I would put them, separately. And
Mm-hmm.
then I would say Todd Phillips was able to communicate a city that was,
Right.
like it was certainly about to go bankrupt. Like it definitely had that vibe. So, that was done well enough.
Yeah, I'd agree. Again, thinking of the beginning of the film, and again, you had to also, there was showing, but there was telling over the radio describing the condition of the city and the impact, everything within society and all. So I'd probably agree with you more. Like I'd probably put Burton up there as number one, and I'd probably toggle between Nolan's and Phillips's as number two, and Schumacher's I forget about. I actually would give more credit to Zack Snyder's Gotham more than Schumacher's. So that's why I was still shocked he didn't include it. But
There's
still,
nothing to remember.
it didn't hurt. It was
It's
neutral.
just
It was,
pathetic.
you're right. It was forgettable.
You could put any movie in. Okay, how about this? You could put any movie in Nolan or Schumacher. I'm sorry, Nolan or Snyder's Gotham. You
Mm-hmm.
could not put any movie in Schumacher's Gotham. You could film You've Got Mail in Nolan's Gotham. You could not
Right.
film that in Schumacher's Gotham City.
Anyway, that's it. We can jump right into Parasite and kick us off to that.
Yeah, let's do it. So you had mentioned obviously 2019 came out. I remember there was a lot of chatter about it. I think there were two waves of chatter. There was the very initial wave that I kind of caught wind of very early on. And I was kind of interested in that. And then there was a second wave when it started hitting theaters in America where then everyone was talking about it. So it seemed very interesting to me. Obviously, the title is something that you're kind of like, well, I want to know more about this movie. I, dug in a little bit, heard that it was pretty disturbing, like, that you don't know where it's going to go. It constantly flips on you, and that it was really great. So that intrigued me for sure. And then by the time I had a chance to see it in theaters, everybody was talking about it. People at work or, like a lot of folks had seen it, gave it, their thumbs up. So it kind of had the early buzz and then the more mainstream buzz in two very distinct ways. And there was a bit of time that separated those two, as I recall. But you had said it was your best movie of 2019, certainly my favorite and one of my favorites for a while. Do you want to talk about the movie just generally first? Because I have some thoughts there. Do you want to kind of link it to Joker and why we made that mention in the beginning, or how do you want to handle that?
Sure, I'll start with my experience first. Like you, because I'm trying to remember, because you say you heard it before it was released in the United States. I've only heard of it when it was, I think, a couple of weeks prior to being released here. So I didn't even pay attention to what the festivals was playing at before or anything like that. So when you first heard of it, when would you say that was?
I want to say, gosh, it was probably around this time, maybe last year. It was when it
Oh,
was hitting,
really?
when it was on like the festival circuit. Yeah, people were talking a lot about it, and I was like, well, how am I going to see this movie? And then there were specific ways you were able to see it, as I recall, but this was way before it hit like your regular movie theater.
Okay. Yeah, I had only heard of it late, like in the fall. I think only a few weeks, like I said, before being released. And I'd only heard of it because, my indicator in terms of movies that I want to watch is, of course, getting I fall into the trap of getting the aggregate first in terms of the movies that are getting the high praise or the bad reviews, whatever it is, to steer clear of. And then this one got, I think it was like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic, and the poster, I didn't see any ads for it. We didn't see a trailer because the movie wasn't, those trailers wouldn't be shown behind the movies that you would see that had been released that year, in that summer. So I just saw the poster and I just like immediately was like, well, sold. Well, it was incredibly intriguing. And I know that you had mentioned, you brought up the fact that they did multiple posters, of course, in different countries, and just kind of how I think they were different scenes from the movie, and it conveyed something differently, of course, within the posters, which was incredibly intriguing. But I'd seen that after I watched the movie. But the U.S. poster, where their eyes are totally blacked out and they're in the backyard, Like that was just like boom, I'm sold. I don't need to know anything about this movie going in. I'm going to see it as Bong Joon-ho, and I've seen his other Snowpiercer and all that. I wasn't an enormous fan of that movie,
Right.
but and the host I loved. But anyway, with Parasite, I just wanted to go in fresh, just go in for the experience, and yeah, for me, it was. The reason why, of course, we're talking about it after Joker's, it did come up in our, as I mentioned before, it came up in our review, our discussion, and it was just, I think it just handled the social commentary about modern life and economic inequality, in this case in Korea, a whole lot better than Joker had done that in Gotham City, in that movie, and it's and how it's handled in more focus than Joker was. And that's why those two movies coming out in the same month, where I was disappointed with Joker, I wanted to love it, didn't. I was very happy that many other people did. But what I didn't find in Joker, I got out of Parasite, and the incredible focus and the confidence I had in the narration, the direction, and the characters. I think the acting was phenomenal, and just that journey I went on. And the thing is, I've seen it at the AMC on 42nd Street. And the audience that I was with, it was just one of the best theatrical experiences I've ever had. I mean, it was also the same year that I saw Knives Out. That was another great theatrical experience. But another great reason that I would not want to see this on Hulu. I'm so thrilled that I saw it in theaters, because it was also the energy of the audience reacting to what was on screen. Because then we're going to go into everything in a little bit, but it's just how the movie unfolds and how the movie balances many comedic moments. Where, again, me not seeing a trailer, you knew within the poster there's something going on there, that it couldn't be a full outright comedy. But when those comedic moments hit, at some point in the movie, I thought this is almost like it's like a grifting movie, and the tone of the movie is now very upbeat, very light. But then things take a turn, and then you'll have some very horrific moments. And the insane thing, what I loved about it, is just how it was able to balance the lightheartedness of the movie, the comedic elements, with the horrific moments, which I don't think many filmmakers can properly do. And it's almost like this magic trick that I was just totally won over by the end of the movie. So, and the audience, it was a roller coaster ride for the audience. They were, laughing hysterically in many moments, and then they were gasping, they were shouting in others. And not many other movies that are released, these movies in Hollywood are released have that impact. Definitely not those comic book movies. Maybe the last Avengers Endgame, that would be it. But it was just such a great experience. And I know that when we had talked about the movie after I had seen it, I don't think you were in the U.S. You were over in Japan, I think, during that time. And you'd come back and you said, hey, I was thinking of seeing Parasite on the plane. And I said, no, don't you dare. Don't you dare watch on that small screen. I don't know how. Luckily, you didn't. But that was definitely not a movie to see on the small screen. At the big screen, on a big screen, obviously at the very least if you can. But hey, if you got to watch it at home, totally understand. But yeah, I was just like, I couldn't wait for you to watch it, because I couldn't wait to hear what you thought about it. I'm trying to remember, when did you watched it? Probably a month after it was released in the U.S. You said, right?
I believe so. So yes, I did opt to not watch it on the plane, which I was happy. I thought it might be my only chance, but I did end up seeing. I saw it at Nighthawk, actually.
Right. How disappointed would you have been if you did watch that on the plane?
Oh, you know what? I really dodged a bullet there. I did a great job not watching it. So I think I probably ended up seeing it in like December, I want to say.
Okay.
That's when I saw it. But I want to kind of get back onto talking a little bit more about the substance of the movie. So you had mentioned like the moments, and that's actually something that I kind of earmarked that I found really well done with this movie. And if we should it's unfair to compare this movie to Joker. I mean, clearly, as you had said, both are trying to tackle societal issues, Gotham City versus South Korea, economics, to a lesser extent, the idea of possibly even a caste system about where you are on the economic ladder. But in one area, I think about the moments in Parasite, and the scenes build on each other, and there's an additive impact where if you were to just show someone a clip from Parasite, there are certain scenes that certainly stand on their own, but they really work so well together as you continue to go through this movie and as you traverse this journey. Whereas Joker, yeah, of course they do build to something. All movies do. It's a sequential story. But a lot of those scenes you can just pull out and just throw. I don't know if you remember like short attention span theater on Comedy Central, like way back in the day. They would just show like 2-minute clips from movies. Like you could do that with the Joker. Like you could appreciate the scene with at the very end with Robert De Niro as kind of a standalone scene, but you really get so much more from Parasite. Like if you see like one random scene, it just doesn't carry that weight. And that's the moments that I think you're talking about, because you've got the comedy and you've got all of these uneasy moments, and they work so much better because they're playing off of each other.
The scenes that like even when when we watched the Academy Awards all together with our friends and all, but when they showed even the clips from Parasite, it is so vivid in my mind. After you see the movie, it's like I don't even have to rewatch the movie again because those scenes are just so they linger on with you. You can't forget. I feel like it's a very difficult movie to forget because for some reason they're ingrained. Like I could rewatch the movie and I have watched it again since, but they're still so vivid in my mind. And yeah, the pieces of them, and those scenes and what they mean and everything behind it. It's so well layered.
Mm-hmm.
The imagery, the symbolism, all that.
And it's a really good example of like where 2 + 2 = 5, because as we talk about more movies, we're pulling in our own kind of building blocks. So we've talked about, and they're standard. We're not saying anything that people haven't talked about a million times. Cinematography, acting, score, direction, all of those things, right? But this is where everything is coming together, and you just have all of this synergy. It's like an orchestra where everybody working on that movie is giving it like 210%, and that movie just really sings. We talked about Joker in the last episode. We praised the cinematography. We agreed that Joaquin Phoenix's performance was excellent. We did give credit to the score. They come together pretty well, but they're almost kind of elbowing each other. Like, no, I'm going to be the thing that you love the most about this movie, or like, I'm the star. In Parasite, like everybody's doing their job. No one is trying to outdo the other. They're all working together. You've got amazing sets. Like the sets are fantastic. You've got beautiful lighting, excellent acting. The score is really well done. The script is great. The translation is great. Let's not put that to the wayside. And they all just come together, and like everyone just doing what they're doing, and everyone's super confident in doing it, and they know it's just going to all come together, and nothing is going to be out of sync. And that's something that I really liked about the movie. And then especially if we're going to start comparing it to other movies, that's why this movie is Best Picture. That's why this movie is talked about so reverently.
Yeah, everything. Like even you mentioning the score, I think like this in the direction that takes. I mean, again, going from the very beginning of the movie, where even the score will be a bit more comedic, and then it gets a whole lot darker as the film goes on. That's just the score, but then also you got the cinematography, everything kind of, but all working, like you said, together. With the everything from the way the film's shot from the very beginning, when the characters are the opening sequence and the characters are pretty much where they're living, in that basement, and just how everything's shot, how it's really there to bring the audience into their lifestyle and where they're coming from. They're very, very poor. The Kim family you're being introduced to. And then just as the cinematography takes you through everything, then eventually you're going to be introduced to the Parks family, and then very rich, like there's this beautiful house on the hill. That contrast, that contrast right there, just everything from the cinematography, the score, the script, the narrative, the acting, all of it coming together. I 100% agree. I do disagree with you on one thing. Like I said, you say that it's hard, unfortunately, you can't really compare to the Joker. No, there are, obviously it's not attempting to adapt a comic book or anything like that, but they are tackling similar themes. And it stands out like Parasite in juxtaposition next to Joker. You just go, oh well, this resonates so much more with what they're attempting to do, whereas this other one didn't, at least for me. But yeah, like I couldn't agree more. And what the other thing I love about Parasite is that, compared to like a Gotham movie, like there are evil characters in a Batman movie, but in Joker, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, in Parasite, there are no evil characters really in this film. I don't think you'd call them evil. There are horrific things that occur, and situations get more and more complicated as the film goes on. But would you agree to that there aren't any evil characters in the film?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think, certainly some people may have different opinions, but absolutely everybody is kind of just existing in their own world. And the problem
Yeah.
is when these worlds collide, because obviously everyone has different motivations and everyone has different viewpoints and they don't jive together. And I think that's where
Right.
the conflict, that's when the friction starts, when they start rubbing up against each other. And that's where you end up having all of the horrific things that occur.
Right. That the class struggles, what people at the bottom will do to get to the top and all that. Yeah, absolutely. And then you throw the metaphors in there as well. Yeah, but I'll have you take the lead on this. Do you want to go through the story a little bit? Should we, or should we know this is going to be, we're going to spoil everything and we'll just dive into the moments that resonated the most. Where do you want to take this?
I'd prefer to just talk about the movie and dive in. I would assume most people have seen it. And if not, please, just stop listening, go see the movie, and then come.
Right.
We'd love for you to come back. So, but I don't think it makes sense to talk too much about the story to go through it. We've done a couple of these discussions, and one of the things that we've talked about often is the concept of confidence when making a movie. And not to beat a dead horse, but this movie has confidence in spades.
Yeah.
So you just mentioned the opening scene where we're in the Kim's apartment, and it's just, a basement apartment. It's just awful.
Struggling for Wi-Fi.
And what I think is so great about that is the confidence to make it kind of funny, not beat you over the head with it. You're showing the audience, again, you're not telling them, you're showing the audience, you're just going in, you definitely get the sense that this is just any random day. You just happen to join them on this random day where they don't have Wi-Fi and they're dealing with all this stuff. And it sucks, but they're not kind of wallowing too much in it. And it just seems so normal to me, which I really liked. And then you juxtapose that with Joker, where they're just browbeating you. He's just sitting there on the couch. The apartment's dimly lit. It's just that in that situation, there was no confidence that you would get the sense that this was a bad living situation or this was a bad environment or whatever. So again, that's where, if you were to tell me like, well, how do you demonstrate a movie doing a great job of showing you something like this? It's Parasite versus Joker, and clearly Parasite does a better job.
Right, and then it's also, even when we were talking about the beginning, like you're constantly being reminded of their situation with, whether it be the struggles for the Wi-Fi or just seeing the people, because again, they're below street level there, they're located. So, but then you see people urinating, that's their spot to go, and you can see these conditions, and you're really just thrust right into their world. And with the roaches and everything like that too, so you'll get the father tossing the roach aside, and then of course later on down the in the movie, that's going to be referred. He's going to be like his wife at one point says, "Hey, when at one point in the movie where they're, I mean, we can kind of go into it. Of course, as the narrative goes on, you realize that the son of the Kim's family finds his first way into getting a job working for the Kims, and then of course as the movie goes on, you see he gets his sister to be working for.
I don't mean to interrupt, because I might have made a mistake, but it's the parks that he goes working for, correct?
Right,
Just
correct.
making sure.
Yeah, and so when they go working for and then the Kims as their family, the Kim family, and that's the point of the narrative, I think, where as an audience member, of course, you go, okay, I can see where this movie's going. You're going to get one in at a time, and then work their way. And the great thing is with that grifting is that you see it cuts as the son's getting his sister the job, and then eventually the father. I think there's a scene when the father, I believe, is about to be interviewed with Mr. Park, and then the son is literally almost like a script. He's talking to his father like, okay, you got to do this, this, and this, and it just you get that sense. It's not spilled out like they do in other movies, but you get that sense that they've done this before. It's almost so streamlined, so fluid. And again, it's something that within the script, it's so well layered that it's just like, boom, that's simple. And you get that within a few seconds. And how they kind of orchestrate everything. And then eventually they all make it in, all of them, even the mother, they're working for the Parks. And then what I was going to mention is there's that scene where they're all eventually they're getting very comfortable. So when the Parks are away, they're kind of all they're their family. They're just in a different environment. They're in their house on the hills and they're just enjoying living this lifestyle that they've dreamed of to some degree. Because you do have the symbolism with like what is it the Scholar Stone that was of course given to them. That's I guess supposed to symbolize like potential prosperity. And that's their hope to get from where they were to where they'd like to be, and then they get that. But while they're there, drinking the wine, all that, and enjoying everything, the whole family, the mother, the Kim's mother says to the father, is like, you might be relaxed, you might be having a good time now, but if Mr. Park comes home, you're going to scatter like a roach, and that's exactly what happens. So it's so funny how everything is. It's just again when you watch the movie, I just go, this movie is just it's quite incredible. Where all that's many other things, and we can get into it, but are layered throughout the film. And just going back to the point you made, the confidence in the storytelling. It's just like, you are 100% confident in this director. And and it's just in where this movie is going to lead you. And I gotta say, toward the end, at first when I watched it, I go, "Whoa, where did we get the signs really that Mr. Kim would go and do the thing that he does at the end of the movie?" As I watched it, I was just shocked, my jaw dropping to the floor, and in my subconsciously going, "All right, I'll try to figure that out," in terms of what really got to the point of getting to that link later on, and then I did, and but so. It's hard to say. I'm close to saying this is a perfect movie, and it's hard. There's barely any perfect movies out there. But I'm sorry. I'm going off on the movie. Again, when I think of these moments, I just want to talk about more moments within the movie. So let me have you step in.
Well, yeah. So there are two things that, in response, because you brought up some good points. The first is that the director respects the audience. So when you think about the scenes where each of the family members kind of enters the home and how that happens, it's very, very entertaining. It's great. And those scenes in a lesser movie could very possibly have been very boring and just moving the plot along. I could see lesser writers or lesser directors saying, "Got to get the whole family in there," and they're just going to do it. But each of those situations, those instances where each family member got a new job, it was like just a different kind of situation. It was insanely entertaining, just really well done, and not just drove the story forward, but gave more insight into the characters. You had mentioned the scene with the father, which is highly memorable, and the idea that like they've done this before, they certainly have experience with this level of grifting. So again, that's really great, and you're not boring the audience. You know that they've seen movies where you've got to go from point A to point B. You've seen movies that have montages or kind of juxtaposed scenes, and you understand that. So you're saying, well, I've got to step it up, because otherwise this movie is going to be very similar to all the other movies that are out there.
I think the one thing I'd say is that even when they're going back to, once the son makes it and he's got a job working for him, then he gets a sister in, and the father and the mother, there is a rhythm that I, at least, was familiar to, because, you've seen that kind of like, okay, this is where the plot's going. Now you can kind of get a grasp on where this movie's headed. And I've seen that in other movies, like you said, that haven't been done as well. But you've seen it in Ocean's 11, other movies that have to deal with like, oh, you got this caper, whatever it would be. And then you're familiar with that rhythm, and I think that's the one that might be the moment where Bong Joon-ho's like, he gives it to the audience there, going, you can kind of see where we're going here. You're going to enjoy the ride a little bit, but then Bong Joon-ho's like, but I'm going to take a lot of this away from you. You're not going to enjoy it. It's not going to be as predictable as you might think it is, because I think he is aware that we're familiar with that rhythm within other movies. Like I know I'm just thinking of Ocean's 11 right now, but there are other ones like The Italian Job or whatever it would be. That is there, but I think that's just more of him kind of playing with the audience there. Because he's very confident where this movie is going to be headed, and where there's no way in hell that we can predict, at that moment where we're going, and that's just exciting as an audience member. That's incredibly exciting to not feel like you can get an idea in terms of, oh, I can see where the next steps are going to be, even at that moment where you think, okay, we're going to get the father and the mother's going to come in, but you can't see that far ahead. So to your point, it just adds more to how impactful the movie is.
Yeah, and then so you mentioned the scene where they're kind of all having a party when the family is away.
Yeah.
And that's one of the scenes that I wanted to talk about, because my personal taste, I don't like scenes in movies where characters make really bad choices, like really dumb choices. And that's this scene, right? Because they're making a huge mess, and it's not going to go well for them. And there's just something in me. I don't respond well to those scenes, but I do think it was important, because when you say, well, how did the father end up doing what he did? And that scene actually shows you that he has this kind of hair trigger anger almost.
Right.
The way that he responds to his wife when she says that, he immediately reacts violently, and then that's there because then you have to say, he's had this in him before. You can see how he can act super impulsively and super violently to something.
Do you think that here's the thing, because again, I for some reason it slipped the first time I watched it. I didn't really notice it as much, but the second time I watched it, of course, when she said that, he snaps like that, and you go, wait a minute, there's this undercurrent within him that there's to the point where I'm like, wait, did he really? He probably had done that many times to her before for the things that she had said, and that had been there. So it's just like, what is all this shit going on underneath that you don't really see, that's not coming out overtly on his, on his face, through his actions, through his words. So that is there, again, going to how layered the movie is and the character, and great performance. But so that's one thing that I was like, okay, now this makes sense as to where, how he did what he did toward the end of the movie, that I really didn't respond as well to the first time I watched it. But the thing is, you mentioning that when you watch a movie and you see characters like they are comfortable.
I'm sorry. I just want to, before we go off, I want to put kind of a bow on this a little bit. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's really important is that he is responding to someone specifically commenting on his station in life.
Right.
And then when he does what he does at the end of the movie, it has to do with that smell, the smell.
Right. That's right? Mr. Park's
so it does connect it very well. It provides that degree of consistency where, you can't really feel like it came out of left field. They laid the groundwork a bit for him to respond that way. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to kind of put a pin on that particularly.
Yeah, it's just it's not really, this movie didn't have a scene where you see Mr. Park, go into, after I'm sorry, this movie didn't have a scene where Mr. Kim Mr. Park, after he first mentioned the smell, or you don't see a moment afterwards like other movies would do of Mr. Kim kind of going into a closet and just beating it up, whatever, and the rage coming out. You didn't need that,
right?
But like you said, in the small moments, you'll see that it's peppered throughout, and then of course that's why it's a little more shocking that you see him do what he does toward the end of the movie. I think that's the reason why this movie works well. And I think as an audience member, I'm almost conditioned to see that movie where you see Mr. Kim kind of go, you want to see him lash out a little bit more, to have it be more obvious, where this movie didn't need to. Going back to the question I had for you, because you brought it up, is that, you said you see when you watch movies, and then you'll have the protagonist, in most cases, I assume, they're might be working so hard within the context of the movie to do something so smart. You're with them all the way, and then they do something stupid that you think is stupid, or you maybe could also be, you don't believe that they would do what they have done. I don't know, But you find that as something that takes you you don't like about you kind of detach from the movie a bit. Well, tell me about that.
Yeah, I do kind of get detached from the movie a bit because on the one hand, especially in instances where it just seems so completely illogical and counter to what those characters have been doing throughout the rest of the movie, that's certainly
People
part of
make
it.
mistakes. Like that's the thing. I think that you do go, well, they're going to screw up, and you know that there's got to be conflict. And sometimes I can see there's an idea of like, okay, well, I totally see what you're saying when some movies are you go for the cheap kind of like
Yeah, there are
stupid
mistakes, and then
reason.
there are convenient mistakes that are played for kind of cheap drama or cheap suspense. And while I'm not, saying that that scene in Parasite is cheap. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, like we're doing this now, and you've got to have that whole scene where oh my god, like, you knew immediately they were going to come home, and if it wasn't saved for the twist where you go into the basement, it would have just been like completely rote stuff you've seen a million times before.
Yes, but then you can also say the same thing. It's funny you mention that because I remember after this movie came out and I was excited and I was telling my friends about it. And some of the friends actually saw it. And then we talked about this before, is that you can overhype a movie to such a degree. And it's a very common situation, but people eventually see the movie you've overhyped and they go, it's not the best thing I've ever seen. And then people don't like it as much. And you're like, what are you kidding? This is like gold, you think. But then when other friends that I've had seen Parasite and didn't like it, I asked, well, what didn't work for you? And they would cite the end, sure, but then they also cited this scene that we're talking about. It's not specifically what you're mentioning in terms of how they're kind of like they've got everything out there, the wine, they can at any moment the parks can come back and their cover is blown. But more the scene where the mother, the Kim's mother, where the doorbell rings, and then the Kim's mother lets that person, the wife of the husband who's in the bunker, lets her in. So my friend's complaint was just like, I don't believe that she would. You're working so hard to get your family in here working for them. Why would you let her in? And I go, well, this perfect is she's not perfect. She, there is a reason why she did, and I would believe that to some people they say that's stupid. I don't think so. I think, well, she's a human being, and she didn't. She bought what the wife of the husband of the mucker. I'm forgetting the name of the character, but she just did. Do you feel the same way about that particular moment?
No, I don't think it's stupid. I would agree with you on that one, simply because that seems like a natural reaction because she's here. It's weird. Why is she here? What's going on? Let me deal with it. Like, because I don't want her coming back. So like, I would probably behave the same way. Like, I can control the situation. If she comes in, I can control this, right? I don't need people seeing her out there, in the rain. It's weird. Like, so I understand that. I think her letting her into the house makes a lot of sense. I would not nitpick
What
that
that leads to is
in
not
particular.
anything really contrived. It just adds to a deeper level in the movie, and that's where I go. Well, it's incredibly, it just adds more to the film, and the reason why it works so well. This is diving deeper and deeper into again the themes,
Literally.
symbolism. Yeah, right. So it's just like if it did go down a path that was contrived, or whatever it would be, then I'd be like, all right, I might agree with my friends on that, but I'm like, no, okay, I can that's fine with me. That works for me because again, going back to what we're talking about, I'm incredibly confident in the narrator of this story. This movie doesn't need to be flawless, but I'm on board with what the writer director the story is trying to tell.
Right. And I think up until that point, what I think is really great about the movie is things aren't going to end well, but you can't predict how they're going to end badly. Like the movie does not telegraph it that much that you can predict how it's going to end. You just know you have this terrible feeling that you're carrying throughout the movie, like inside of you. You know it's going to go bad, and you're just like, when is it going to go bad, and how is it going to go bad? And I had a similar feeling with the Joker, but at the same time, with Parasite, it's the stakes are higher in my opinion because look, we all know he's going to become the Joker, right? So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just don't have, you can't see totally too far in terms of what's ahead of you. and you get some pieces of it. And then, I mean, there are silly moments where, like, of course, when the Kim family, when most of them are hiding, when they go down in the bunker for the first time, and then they discover, that the wife has the husband hiding down there because I think he owned a cake business, and he had creditors coming after him and all that. But the thing is that once that scene happened where the Kim family's all hiding on the staircase, and then they fall, almost like it's from the Friends sitcom on how comedic it is. Again, for me, I go, okay, now we can kind of see what happens. And I kind of got that telegraph where it's like, okay, now they're going to take the phone out. They're going to use this against them. And now we have them literally clawing to kind of struggling to get that phone away from, out of their hands. But it's great. It works because you got that tension. And again, for some people, they might see that as, oh, well, we've seen that before in a sitcom or whatever. But here again, it works, and it goes back to that slightly comedic tone with the harsh elements that are, that follow.
Yeah, but only slightly, because they don't harp on the slapstick for too long, because then it gets incredibly gruesome. Right.
That's what I'm saying. The junk.
Right. And then I was going to say, and in fact, you could even say they play slapstick to its realistic and horrifying end.
Here's the thing, as we're talking about, I'm thinking Bong Joon-ho, for him to even try to attempt, because it's all, when he wrote the script, I mean, how he would think that this would work out, because comedy is, I think, it's very difficult to pull off, and especially trying to balance it with these horrific moments and underlying with the theme you're conveying with your story.
And translating into another language also.
Right.
Because,
and how that works so well. I'm like, how did he, because it easily couldn't have. He could have tried and go, this just doesn't work. But the fact that he was that ambitious enough to balance everything like that, and that it paid off. I mean, we watch so many movies where you've heard the stories where it was a great script, but then it just didn't turn out to be, as great as many people, read it to be. And it just, it fails in many moments because you got multiple people on the project, writer, director, producer, and you might have a whole committee that changes the course of changes many scenes. It doesn't work, and it's a mess. But here, the fact that, he saw the vision from his script and how the comedy would work that well, it's surprising. So again, another huge achievement. And I'm, again, thrilled that it won Best Picture, and it's got all the accolades.
Let's get into the ending, actually. So I'd love to hear what you thought about it, because clearly, it says a lot. So, I think I'd like to tackle it in turn. So,
I mean, I think leading into that final scene, well, you have that son when there's the party going out in the backyard, and then the son is upstairs and he's looking out the window with the daughter of the Parks family who he's interested in and wants a future with. He's looking out the window, and I can't believe we didn't even discuss this. Sorry. After that night where we're discussing when the Parks come home early, and then the horrific moments, again, going back to what we just talked about, balancing almost comedy with horror, is that moment where the wife of the husband in the basement, where she's about to run up the staircase that leads to the kitchen, which also, when you look at it, the way the framing is in the scene, most of the scenes, that black, it's weird. A basement that you don't see the Parks ever really going down. They're never really utilizing it, yet it's so prominent within the kitchen. But for as an audience member, it just shows that line that, Mr. Park he kind of references. He's like, this character doesn't cross the line. Mm-hmm. And then you literally see a line within that kitchen, which is, it's odd for us, even as a viewer, because we don't see many kitchens with that. And again, the Parks don't go down it. But when the Kims do, they come back down, from the bunker. Well, at one point, when the Parks come home, the Kims have got to get back to going through their routine to help them out. And then the wife of the husband in the basement runs up this staircase, and it's huge. We're, as audience members, like, oh my God, what the hell's going to happen? And then Miss Kim kicks her down the staircase, and in a way that scene is carried out, it's done almost comedically. You just hear a boom, boom, and the sound, everything kind of working well. Where you go, when I saw it in theaters, people laughed at that scene, but then immediately, followed by horror because the woman, the wife from downstairs, hit her head, and the way the rest of that scene played out, because then, Mr. Kim and the son and the daughter scatter. Leave while it's pouring rain outside, and you have the amazing cinematography, which It's a gut punch. I think when I watch, especially when I watched it the second time, where you see them all, the cinematography, you got to love those overhead shots as they're going through the towns. It's getting poured on. They're literally like roaches, like going through the streets, and it's
Yeah,
just
the
such
rain
a like,
literally flushing them down the drain
yeah,
and back to their original apartment.
flooded, and then their homes flooded.
Yeah.
It's just the gut where this is a movie where I can't watch that often, like the Joker. I couldn't watch that again, but for different reasons. But here, it's just like that. When you get to that scene, it's just such a oh, and and then they come home, they see their apartment flooded. That is just that scene is just it hits. It's probably wow. I'm just speechless after I watch that. But then it leads to the scene we're about to discuss is that the moment where the son is looking the Mr. Kim's son is looking down at this party going on at the parks, and he's looking at everyone at the party, all the friends of the parks, and he says to the daughter of Mr. Park, Mr. and Mrs. Park, that he says, "Do I fit in here?" And then she says, "Yeah, I guess." It's almost like of course, she assumed it. But in his mind, he's just like, "Well, do we fit in?" How impactful that scene is. And then, of course, it follows with, the husband in the basement realizing that, he's just seen his wife die. And he's going out getting his revenge, and with the knife. And it's even hard to describe right now, but just how when you're watching it, you're just kind of like, you're in shock as almost like everyone at that party, just was seeing everything go down. And again, it's like, whoa, where is this guy? Whoa, and yeah, it's a shock, when you see that. And how did you take that ending?
What I thinking back, and I think even as I was watching it, the instant that you had the scene in the basement where you had like the instant that you introduced the violence into the movie, that was it. The genie was out of the bottle, and like you knew that more blood was going to be shed. It was like you knew that there was going to be a lot more to come because the movie demonstrated they have no qualms about using violence, and in fact, we're going to solve the problem, or we're going to bring this to a crescendo with violence. So already you kind of had the sense that like this is going to end really, really bad. It's not going to end in like something incredibly embarrassing or like where they get called out and there's this whole kind of comedic kind of ending. Like no, like this is going to end in the worst possible way.
So you brought that up a few times. See, I didn't go while I was watching this movie. I wasn't even trying to think that far ahead. I was just going, just take me. I'm just rolling with every scene that's coming next and all that. So, and then of course that particular scene does set it up where you go, okay, now we're focusing on the husband in the base in the bunker, and what his intentions are become very clear when he used the Scholar Stone to hit the Mr. Kim's son, Mr. and Mrs. Kim's son, in the head. You're like, oh God, like now this is getting insane, and for lack of a better word, but yeah, it's just I didn't necessarily see that coming. You might have, but I didn't know it was going to play out the way that it did, and especially shocked that Mr. Kim, of course, that scene where the body is over the keys, and he says to. Mr. Park says to Mr. Kim, "Oh, the keys, toss me the keys." And then Mr. Kim does, of course, what he does and takes Mr. Park's life. It's so, it's you're bewildered, for lack of a better term. And yeah, I was just kind of blown away by that.
Well, I guess
But did you?
it makes me think a bit about like a Greek tragedy in that like order
Yeah,
needs to be restored, and it doesn't matter how many people die to get
right,
to a return to order, and that's kind of what happens. I mean, for the most part, right? The mother and the son end up back in that apartment. They are cast out. Someone still remains in the basement. Clearly, the Parks move out, but then another rich family moves in there. So it's kind of it sweeps all of that away, and
right.
I wouldn't say it's 100% resolved, but it definitely it just clears off the table. Like all of those elements, it's a moot point now. It doesn't matter if the Parks find out that the Kims are grifters. Like it just gets completely resolved in blood.
Right. Yeah, and then I think the ending, the one part at the very end where I was like, oh gosh, no, wait a minute, hold on, is this one of these movies that is taking a turn where now we're getting a little bit absurd here? and I can't buy it. It's that scene when the son is writing the letter to his father,
Hmm.
and then he's
With
saying,
the
"Oh, this is
Morse
what I'm going to do.
code.
This is my plan." Right, the Morse code, right? Uh, the Morse code, and then he's basically saying, "Okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to get you out," listing all of his what he's looking to achieve, and you actually see that happen. And as an audience member, I'm like, "No, wait a minute, hold on, this is getting a little bit too far fetched." But they paint that picture, that dream, and but then they take it away at the
Right,
very end,
right.
and you know that that's most likely not going to play out that way. And again, I also think, well, the father, he can get out to go get food from the fridge from the bunker, even though he's down there. But he could probably escape. But how far would he get? Because since he's a fugitive, still, so it's like, okay, this is the rest of his life now, and but still, I just thought you don't have to answer those questions. Those questions are up to us to answer as an audience member, and then you just go, well, that actually ended on the best note it could have. I thought. Yeah, and it's just I think the whole as soon as I left, you left that theater on the roller coaster ride that it was, and again with my audience just laughing throughout a lot of it, but then also being terrified and shocked, and you hear that vocally throughout the audience. It was an incredible ride, but just wow, what a punch I felt. And I was just like, how many movies really go that far to have that much of an impact on the audience member? And I just go, wow, there's only a few in the past decade I can think of.
Yeah, and even if you think about movies that use graphic violence um, that much, a lot of those movies are not at the same caliber. I mean, there are some, but just generally speaking, that doesn't often play into movies that are so layered and are so nuanced. So, kudos for sure for pulling in all of those different elements. Humor, suspense, horror to some degree. Just violence and gore. Like, and it works well. And you never, while you may be blindsided, I didn't leave the movie theater thinking like, why did they put that in there? It was so out of character for the movie. Like, I think every element that was in that movie fit.
It's a great film, and I think that it will stand the test of time. I think as decades go on, it's going to be looked at as one of the greats. I think. And yeah, I can't wait to see what Bong Joon Ho will have next. I think that now that there'll be a ton of studios throwing money his way to make whatever he wants to next. I
Yep.
think that's great. I heard they're going to make a TV show out of this, which I'm not too thrilled of,
Yeah.
because my feeling of TV shows is that unless they're really compact in like 10 episodes of just not much filler at all, there's just more room for it to not be, to go down different areas that could have been a waste or whatever it would be. And this movie is as close as you can get to perfect. I feel like why try to explore further? Just leave it be. But then again, hey, they can do the TV show. This movie will always be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I left Joker, of course, feeling a little bit like, ooh, there was an impact that I'd left where I was just like, ooh, that was a ride. But a lot of that was due to Joaquin Phoenix's performance, him lifting everything up, and of course, cinematography, direction. But I had problems with it, like we discussed last time. Here, again, boom, got a huge, got a huge blow from the movie, and then I just go, no, I don't have any problem. This really worked. This is what I couldn't have, I didn't know what I was going into watching this movie, but I was just like, how could I have expected something even better than what I saw? And I was, thrilled. So like I said, best film of 2019. Yeah, that was it for me. I think it was the best film of 2019 for you as well. You said, right?
That's right. And there are movies that you watch twice, and the second time you watch it to kind of digest the first time because maybe you needed to see it again to pull it all together. And this movie is not that kind of movie. You get it from the first viewing, and when you watch it a second time, you appreciate it more, but it's not required. And I think that
Right.
that's another hallmark of a good movie.
Yeah, and all those scenes being so vivid after watching it the first
Right.
time. Whereas there are other movies like The Usual Suspects, and you watch it, and afterwards you're like, I want to watch this movie again, and you see more of the flaws,
Well,
and it doesn't hold together.
not to harp on one movie in particular, but that's
Right,
that's a specific example of the movie that I'm
right.
kind of
Just give me an
thinking about
example.
because it's
Right.
like you watch it, and then you watch it again because then you kind of want to go and backfill all of those scenes.
Right.
And then, but what ends up happening is it's like, well, why should I have to watch a movie twice? Right? Like most movies are really meant to be seen once for the most part. You know, to expect someone to go back, to require them to go back and watch it again, to be able to better understand it, that doesn't work for me. If you make me, if I watch it again and it makes me appreciate it even more, then that's a different story.
Well, see, I think there's some genius. I mean, there's a genius in another one other movie I'll compare it to is Inglorious. To mention because of what you just said is that Inglorious Bastards. That's that scene where Michael Fassbender is having that conversation downstairs.
Yeah, great
he,
scene. Yeah.
He brings up, when he asks for glasses, how many beers? He says 3, and
Right.
So the first time as an audience member, you don't see what's going. You don't see what specifically happened. You don't get, there's not a big reaction from the audience going, oh my gosh, he did that. No, you didn't get that the first time, but you notice through the person he's speaking to, the German he's speaking to, that you can see the reaction on his face that, wait, something's wrong here. And then, shit goes down. And then, of course, you're conveyed later on by another character specifying what happened, what was the reason, what was the catalyst for what just happened. And then as an audience member, you go, oh, okay, now I got that, the reason for that. So when you watch Inglourious Basterds a second time, then you go, oh, now so it does work well on that other viewing that actually improves upon the experience. But that's very rare. That's why I could
that's
really
like Parasite, I think.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to watch Inglourious Basterds a second time for it to click.
But you'll have a different.
Inglourious Basterds delivers on one viewing, whereas there are other movies that really don't deliver until a second viewing, and that's what I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
But anything more you want to mention?
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover on this. I don't want to bloat this episode out because we could easily just double its length. So I'm pretty satisfied with how we've tackled it, and we could always go back and talk about it some more later.
Yeah, and I gotta say one last thing I will mention is that the father, Mr. Kim, Kang Ho's son, I've seen him in other movies from Bong Joon-ho, and that was the one actor in this movie that I did recognize from previous films, but I can't wait to see what this guy does. I hope he's in more, not just more films here in America. Because I just thought his performance and everyone else in the film was great. So just more highlighting the acting in the movie.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah, I love that guy for sure.
So thrilled. So anyway, it was great talking about it. And so we'll see you all on the next episode.
Catch you then. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to not miss a single bounce.
We'll catch you next time. And don't forget to leave reviews on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you listen to Movie Bounce.